Thank you, Mr. President. I know we're working through these nominations, an important one before us now, and as we continue to debate it, I thought it was also a good time to continue talk about the overall function of the federal government and some of the important things that it does. Today I had the occasion to meet with individuals up here on behalf of the One Foundation. It's a fantastic group I learned about for the first time in 2010. I was running for the United States Senate, and a group of activists in black shirts with a round white symbol on the shirt that said One, and I didn't know what it was. I thought maybe it was a protester or somebody of that nature. They're very polite, and at the end they approached me and started talking about it. And they are a group that's basically supporters of global engagement on behalf of the United States, co-founded by Bono, the front man for the band U2, which I think is familiar to most people at this point. And so they're here again today, and we had an opportunity to meet with them early this morning. Many of our members here perhaps have seen them in the visits around the Capitol. And it brought to mind something I wanted to talk about today, and that's the broader issue of U.S. foreign aid, the State Department, and engagement in the world. Let me back up and tell you what I think I hear that most people hear here as well from a lot of people. And this has been going on for a long time, and I don't blame people, because people have real lives, they have businesses to run and families to raise, so they're not watching the federal budget line by line on a regular basis. So there's a perception out there that the United States government spends extraordinary percentage of our overall budget on foreign aid. I saw a poll recently, a legitimate poll conducted, and it asked people, how much do you think of the federal budget goes to other countries? And the average was 26%. That's what people thought. Of course, the truth is nothing even close to that. So I want to begin by saying today, foreign aid, as part of our overall budget, is less than 1% of the total amount the U.S. government spends. Less than 1%. The second thing people bring up is, well, but we have so many problems in America. And we do. We have real issues that we need to confront. Why do we spend so much money on these other countries when we have so much problems here at home? That is a legitimate question. People should ask that. And I think it's important for those of us who believe in global engagement and believe in the function of foreign aid to justify it, to never take it for granted, and to constantly examine it to make sure the money is being spent well and that it's worth spending at all. And so that's what I wanted to come on the floor and do here today for a few minutes. I know that we're soon going to enter a budget cycle, and there'll be debate, and every dollar in the budget should justify itself. And I wanted to explain for a moment why I believe that global engagement through foreign aid is so critical. Here's the first. The world has always been interconnected, especially for America. We are not a small, obscure nation. We are the most influential, the most consequential nation on the planet. And I can tell you that almost without exception, if there is a major crisis anywhere on this planet, it will eventually have a nexus to life in America in one way or another. You think about one of the controversial issues that's been debated in Washington and been discussed politically is Syrian refugees. I remember a couple years ago, people would tell me, well, it's very sad what's happening in Syria, but what does that have to do with us? Well, 2.5, 3 years later, I think we all know the answer. And that is that when refugees are created anywhere in the world, it is natural that a significant percentage of them want to come to the richest, the freest, the safest, the stablest nation in the world. And that's the United States of America. It also impacts our allies. We've seen that in Europe, where a tremendous strain has been placed upon our allies in Europe. A significant amount of the budget in Germany, where I was recently just visited, is being spent on dealing with the refugee crisis and the impact it's having on them. So I would tell you that what happens in the world has direct consequence to the United States. Here's another fact of why it matters to America. This is a key fact that I was able to pull up today, or my staff was. 12 of the 15 top trading partners of the United States were once recipients of United States foreign assistance. Now, I think the best way to justify foreign assistance is to understand the history of it. So let's go through it a little bit here. We're going to go back in time. Let's go out to the end of the Second World War. Europe is in ruins. Japan is in ruins. And the United States, had it behaved like most great powers in history, would have either abandoned those nations to themselves, or the United States would have conquered them and made Japan a colony, or made Germany a dependent on the United States. Instead, through the Marshall Plan, the U.S. rebuilt Western Europe, and in particular Germany, Through additional assistance, the United States provided aid to rebuild post-war Japan. In the Japanese case, between 1946 and 1952, the United States invested $2.2 billion, or $18 billion in today's dollars, in Japan's reconstruction effort. That amounts to more than 1/3 of the $65 billion in goods that the United States exported to Japan just last year, in 1 year alone. What is the result of this aid? Here's the result. Today we have a prosperous, unified Germany, which is a strong member of NATO and a strong ally of the United States. And we have in Japan the world's third largest economy and one of the most important allies of this great country, of ours, in the Asia-Pacific region. This would not have been possible without United States assistance. Did it help the people of Japan and the people of Germany? Absolutely. Did it help the people of the United States? Without question. Is the world a better place today because Germany is a free, democratic nation involved in trade, involved in alliances with us, deploying troops around the world for NATO missions? Without a doubt. Is the world a better place because Japan is the third largest economy and a strong ally of the United States in the Asia-Pacific region? Without a doubt. And so that's an example of the fruits of U.S. engagement. Well, some will say to me, well, but that's after the Second World War. That was a catastrophic event. But as a matter of course, when else has this borne fruit? Isn't this just money that we throw down a hole and never see the results of? Well, I would tell you that that's not the case. I would point to South Korea. It's hard to believe, but just a few decades ago, South Korea was poorer than North Korea. South Korea had less money, less of an economy, less prosperity than North Korea. Today, South Korea is an industrialized, fully developed economy, one of the largest economies in the world. A nation that not long ago was a military dictatorship is now a vibrant and functioning democracy, a strong American ally, and they are no longer a recipient of aid. You know what South Korea now is? They are a donor state, as is Japan, by the way, as is Germany, by the way. And so, again, another example. You want one in our own hemisphere? Look at the country of Colombia. Colombia, not long ago, was basically a failed state. That country had been overrun by drug gangs, the cartels, the Medellin cartel, the Cali cartel. Their government was on the verge of collapse, presidential candidates being assassinated, an extraordinary source of instability in the Western Hemisphere. Colombia still has challenges, but Plan Colombia and the investment in that country in a decade of over $14 billion, today, an investment in that kind wasn't $14 billion, but our investment in helping them move forward with Plan Colombia. Today, trade between the United States and Colombia is at $14 billion, and as of last year, it actually was a surplus. Here's what's more. Colombia is now a force multiplier for our causes. So, for example, if you visit Honduras, as I did during the summer, and you see the Honduran police and Honduran special forces being trained to take on the criminal elements and cartels in that country, you know who's there training them alongside of our people? The Colombians. The Colombian military units that have the same uniform, the same training, the same weaponry, the same practices as the Green Berets of the United States. And they are a force multiplier. And today, Colombia is doing the things America once had to do because of the aid that we provided them, and they're perhaps our strongest ally in the Western Hemisphere. It goes on and on from a human perspective. You think about America's Feed the Future initiative. It's an initiative that's trained thousands of farmers in Tanzania over the last decade, and now our country exports to them. Our exports to Tanzania from the United States have increased by 500%. It's important to point, by the way, that there have been reductions in foreign aid over the last few decades. Today, we spend 50% less on foreign aid than we did as a percentage of our gross domestic product than we did when President Reagan was in office near the end of the Cold War. And there's rationale for this as well, for our economy and for our national security. From our economy and our economic perspective, 95% of the consumers in the world, 95% of the people on this planet who buy things live outside the United States. 7 of the 10 fastest growing economies happen to be in the developing world. So if you are an American company that makes things, and I know we want to make things in America again, you have to sell them to someone. If you can only sell them to 5% of the world's population that happens to live in the United States of America, that's one thing. But imagine how much more you could sell how much more money you could make, how much more value you would have for your shareholders, how many more employees and jobs you would create if you could sell to more of that 95% of the people around the world. But you can't sell, people can't be consumers if they're starving. They can't be consumers if they're dying of HIV/AIDS. They can't be consumers if they're dying of malaria. They can't be consumers if they live in an unstable country. So there is an economic rationale for our investment around the world. We are helping people to emerge from poverty and ultimately become members of a global consumer class who buys American goods and services. We are, in essence, planting the seeds for markets to develop that we can trade with, that we can sell to. That's one of the reasons why it's so important. That's one of the reasons why today 1 out of 5 American jobs are tied to international trade. 1 in 3 manufacturing jobs in America are tied to exports. You can't export unless there's people on the other end of the deal to buy it from you. And we want as many people in the world to be able to afford to buy things from us. And it begins in many places around the world by ensuring that they are alive, and then to ensure that they have the education they need to develop an economy so their people can become consumers and trade partners with us. And the list goes on in terms of the accomplishments it's had. Our global anti-malaria program has saved over 6 million lives, primarily children under the age of 5. PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, has saved more than 11 million people and has prevented 2 million babies from being born with HIV. The number of school-aged children worldwide out of primary school, in essence not going to primary school, dropped to 57 million children in the year 2015. Still too many, but the number was nearly twice that, 100 million, just 7 years ago. There's been a 99% reduction in polio cases, thanks to the efforts that we have led in vaccination program. And the list goes on and on. There's a national security component to this. And here it is. Imagine for a moment that you're a child born in Africa and your mother, your parents had HIV and they survived because of American assistance. Or imagine if you yourself was someone that survived because of American assistance from dying from HIV or from malaria, or you got to go to school because of American help, or you didn't contract polio the way your relatives used to contract polio because of American assistance. Imagine if you are one of these young people around the world whose lives are better because of the help of the American taxpayer. This is never going to be 100% for sure, but I promise you it's going to be a lot harder to recruit someone to anti-Americanism, anti-American terrorism, if the United States of America was the reason why they're even alive today. That's the national security component, apart from allowing countries to become more stable and provide for their people and for themselves. By the way, when we talk about the international affairs budget, it's not just foreign aid, it's everything: diplomatic relations, trade and economic relationships with the global community, security assistance with key allies. Israel, as an example, provide them $3 billion in military assistance. They're a key ally in a strategic part of the world. We talked about the health clinics and the schools, the humanitarian relief efforts. I'll remember going to the Philippines about 3 or 4 years ago, and one of the first things people mentioned to me was that after that horrible storm that killed and hurt so many people, they woke up one morning and saw a U.S. aircraft carrier off the horizon, and they knew that things were going to be better because America was on the case. Think about the power and what that means for our nation and the impact that it has on people around the world. This is the part of it. And by the way, when we travel abroad, when you're an American and you're in another country and you lose your passport or your wallet gets stolen or you have any sort of issue or you have to work abroad, many people I know, we get the calls in our office, people who have kids studying abroad and they have an issue, they have to go to the consulate or the embassy. This is the budget that pays for that stuff. This is the budget that pays for that. Or if you're a company that decides, I want to do business in this new country, I want to go over there and see if I can, fly to this country, find some customers, and maybe come back to America and hire 20 more people so that we can build products to sell. I want to expand our reach. It's our U.S. embassies and the agencies working within them that are helping make those connections for American businesses. That's part of this budget. So when we talk about this, I think it's critical for us as leaders to explain to the American people just exactly what it is we're talking about. We always want to put America first. We always want to think about the American people first. That's our obligation. But I think this is part of that. If you really want to help the American people, you have to ensure that the world that we live in is a more stable place. Now, I will close by saying, well, this always gets back to the argument that some make, well, why does that have to be us? We've been doing this for so long. We've been involved in this for so long. We've spent so much money. We've so much blood and treasure around the world for the cause of freedom, democracy, humanitarianism, and the like. Why does it have to be America? I think that gets to the fundamental question of what kind of country do we want to be? And the choice before us is, it has to be America because there's no alternative. That's the point I hope people remember and understand. There is no alternative for America in the world today. If America decides to withdraw from the world, if America decides to step back, if America declines and our influence around the world becomes less palpable, what will replace it? And there are only two things that can replace it. Not the UN, there's only two things that can step in whatever America leaves if it steps back. Number one is totalitarianism. For the growing movement around the world led by China and Russia and North Korea and Iran, totalitarian regimes. That is the first thing that could step in and fill the vacuum. And the other is nothing. The other alternative to America is nothing. It is a vacuum. And that vacuum leads to instability, and that instability will lead to violence, and that violence will lead to war, and that will ultimately come back and impact us, whether we want it to or not. This is the choice before us. So without a doubt, I am the sponsor of a law we passed last year, foreign aid accountability. I want to make sure that every dollar of American taxpayer money that is invested abroad for these purposes are spent well and aren't going to line the pockets of some corrupt dictator. 100% agree with that. But this idea that somehow we can just retreat from our engagement in the world is bad for national security, it's bad for our economy, it isn't good for policymakers that want to put the American people first. And by the way, it doesn't live up to the standards of who we are as a people. And I've said this many times before, and in this I'm guided by my faith. I believe that to whom much is given, much is expected. That is what the ancient words in Scripture teach us. I think that principle is true for people, and I think that principle is true for nations. I believe at the depths of my heart that our Creator has honored America's willingness to step forward and help those around the world. And I believe He will continue to do so as long as we use our blessings, not just for our good, but for the good of mankind. And so I hope that in the weeks to come, as we debate the proper role of government and the proper way to fund it, we understand what a critical component foreign aid and the international affairs budget is to the national security and the economic interests, and to our very identity as a people and as a nation. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.